Hey guys, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. We're a show dedicated to uncovering the beauty of the scriptures, probing big ideas in theology and philosophy, and really seeking wisdom for life every day in our world. My name's Ryan John Gregg. I'm sitting here with my friend Destiny Kennedy.
Hey everyone.
And today we are talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's the topic of work ethic. Feels good to say that. Before sin entered the world, according to the Bible's story, before sin entered the world, work was given as a dignifying, creative, productive expression of being human. In fact, a way of co-creating with God, pushing back the borders of the garden of ordered beauty. And we partner with God. So there's this broader theology of work. And we've actually done an episode on that. We've done a whole show on vocation. But today, as a part of that theology, we're going to talk about work ethic. Tenacity, perseverance, diligence, all different ways of expressing that idea of work ethic. And the book of Proverbs is a part of the Bible that hammers on this again and again. It says, hey, if you want to live a long, happy, healthy life, well, it isn't just going to happen. You're going to actually have to work for it. So we're going to talk about that today. Destiny, thanks for being here. And
thank you.
Let me just compliment you. I think you're such a hard worker.
Thank you.
I've always seen that about you, just as a mom, as a student, as a pastor, and now as the director of the Deeper Podcast. Like you've always put heart and excellence into what you do.
Thank you.
And was that something you grew up with? Was that in the water in your home, or what was the messaging around work ethic in your house growing up?
Yeah, honestly, I would say for myself, and I think my siblings would concur, our parents worked so hard.
Your mom's a machine.
Yeah, she is.
She is a worker.
Yeah, and so is my dad. And I think much like there is for just about anything, there's positives and then there's shadow sides to that. I think the positives being that, again, both my parents were incredibly diligent with their work. My mom had so much on her plate, but she was so just faithful. And my dad worked very long hours and kept 2 jobs most of my life, and even still to this day. And he's nearing retirement age. And both my parents, I think, experienced both a deep joy in work and also in ministerial work. Neither of them had like formal training ministerially per se, but both of them felt deeply called to work in the local church. And so both of them have expressed that in addition to their occupation and my mom's work at home with us kids alongside that. And so they've both just really instilled in us a desire for excellence, a desire to be faithful, to get up when you don't feel like it, to be present, and to do what needs to be done to see a vision come to life. And I really appreciated that. But I think the shadow side of that is that we all, I think, in developing such a strong work ethic, sometimes love our work more than we love the people in our lives. And that was something that I think has since I have become an adult is actually healing and is really fun to heal with together, I guess, in our family. And not to share too much personal stuff, but I think that is fun to see that's a really great inheritance I get from my parents is a strong work ethic and enjoying now even work-life balance and getting to see my parents be grandparents and hopefully retire soon and things like that. So
Awesome. Yeah, my dad grew up in farm country in Ohio in like sort of German expats.
Oh, wow.
And so these guys are like old Bavarians getting up, milking the cows at, the crack of dawn. And the religion was work.
Yes.
The German word for work is Arbeit.
Mm-hmm.
And the German for hurry up is mach schnell. And I think I heard Arbeit and mach schnell more growing up. It was just like I need to mach schnell. I need to hurry up and get working. And then so I grew up in rural Montana in farm country, which is very much the same as people of the earth working hard. There's a country music song I've always liked. I almost sang it. I'm going to sing it. You know what?
Okay, go for it.
Well, I can't know who sings it, but he says, "Sing about the way a good man works until the daylight's gone."
You Montanans.
Yeah, I know. Your husband's from Montana.
Yes.
You're aware of
He
our
is.
pathologies.
But I also have respect for a Montanan work
Work was
ethic.
celebrated. You know, this idea, men are like pickup trucks. People are like, you drive best when there's a load in the back, you know? Like, just man up into it. And you already alluded to the fact there's generational gaps here. So, like, for people of my parents, your parents' generation, work is like a love language.
Yes,
like, my dad's love
absolutely.
language is like results.
Yeah.
Just like work your butt off. And
Or even a way of saying I love you.
yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
our generation might say, "You never said you love me," and they're like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I gave my life for you."
Exactly.
You know?
That's actually an important topic, and about the reduction of our concept of love and the way in which instrumental love, like, you know, people who are like nonverbal, and it's not like, I don't want to listen to your feelings for an hour and a half at Starbucks. But if you are in a financial pinch, I am going to show up and give you $500, and I'm probably not
Yes.
going to say much. But I'm saying I love you. I'm
Yes.
just doing it in a different way, you know?
Right.
So discipline in the household I grew up in, discipline's not a dirty word. Discipline's like, that's your gateway to life, man. And interestingly, I learned later that the word discipline in English, related to the word disciple, comes from a Latin root, discere, that means to learn. So discipline is fundamentally about a learning process. And what I find interesting about that is that in the Bible, in the Greek and Hebrew of the Bible, the words for disciple, mathetes in Greek, talmid in Hebrew, both mean student. Like it literally says in Greek, and Jesus' students came along, and no. And the word talmid in Hebrew is like, that's a word that you'd use for like students at a school or whatever. So it's a fundamentally, discipline and learning are interwoven. Now, from, you know, sort of an old timers perspective today, say, it's common to hear these young people are just a bunch of lazy bums and, all entitled. But maybe more charitably, I think that the question has been raised about work-life balance and what am I really wanting out of life, and have seen workaholism. And as you said, work becomes kind of more important than anything. And this is also culturally specific. Someone from France finds the American obsession with work just delirious. I've heard it, this Frenchman says, "You Americans, you live to work.
Yes.
We work to live." So the work is what just enables drinking wine and enjoying my life.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys, all you care about is your work. And this is, so in our culture, discipline is very often a dirty word, and especially in academic circles, because discipline has been essentially seen as a sort of a code word for punishment. When you're disciplining somebody, you're punishing them.
Right.
And you're seeking to control their body. You're seeking to shape them into a predetermined mold that is totally against the grain of their autonomy. And so the very idea of discipline, especially as it's tied in with authority, it's not self-discipline, but if I'm disciplined by somebody else, it's controversial. Let me give you some data points on this, actually, just on the generational gaps. So about 120 years ago, very, very today famous book came out in 1904 by the German sociologist Max Weber. It's called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. This is a very well-known book, in the study of religion. The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And Weber's whole observation is to say, capitalism as a modern political economy really emerged out of Northern Europe in the wake of the Protestant Reformation. Is there some connection between the ethos of the Protestant Reformation and this political economic arrangement, subsequently known as capitalism? In the shift from Catholicism, which is sort of like, hey, look, I got sprinkled as a baby and I went to mass, so like, I'm good. Like, I'm going to heaven. Whereas Protestantism says, no, you're not. Is your soul pure? Because if you got baptized, but your soul's not right with God, then you're not going to heaven. And so there's this inwardness that intensifies. And so you really need the priesthood of all believers, we got to serve God radically. And so what emerges in Northern Europe in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century are people who are working really, really hard And they're actually very prosperous outwardly. Why? Because that's the proof that God's blessing you. It's the proof that God is pleased. However, at the same time, they're living very frugally. They're not going out in wild living. They're actually saving most of it. Why? Again, because of biblical ethics. And so this leads to what Max Weber calls worldly asceticism. It's not the asceticism that goes off and lives in the desert and lives in rags and eats crickets. It's actually a type of asceticism within the world where you're actually hugely productive, but you're not spending anything. You're frugal. What does that produce? It produces capital. It produces an enormous amount of leftovers. And what do you do with it? Well, you churn it back into the system.
You invest it,
and you create more capital. But Weber's whole insight, and it's been critiqued, and it's a really rich area of thought. The nexus between sort of religious formation and how that impacts politics, economics, etc. So the result is capitalism. The idea is that the underlying impulse is that work is good. You want to work really hard. The external product of your work is an index to your value and God's valuation of you.
Approval.
So that's been in the past, but just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, there was a headline that said this. The headline is, Americans don't care as much about work, and it isn't just Gen Z. And then the subtitle said this, blame it largely on the pandemic, which weakened the hold the workplace held on people's psyches. So people's connection, their sense of identity, their psychological attachment to their work is weakening. And from the Protestant work ethic to Gen Z post-pandemic, there has been indeed a shift away from the emphasis on work. And that's not to say lazy, but that is to say there has been some big sea changes here.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious to know how we'd square that with, or maybe how the scriptures might be a commentary toward that as that shift happens. I mean, as we watch it happen, some might say that's overwhelmingly positive for work to have less of a hold on our lives or on our psyche, and others might say, I don't know so much. But how does the Bible inform that conversation?
In lots of ways. So first of all, we might want to differentiate between work and employment.
Helpful. Yes.
So it's work doesn't just mean something with a paycheck attached, and any activity without a paycheck is not work.
Right.
So there's that, and we'll come back to that. The book of Proverbs, which we're focusing on today, builds up a picture of the world that's very multifaceted. There's a lot going on at once in all of our lives.
Yes.
That's why I love the book of Proverbs, because it turns out there's a lot going on in my life at once.
Yes.
At all so the genre is a commentary on our complex world. And part of what it's saying is if any part of your life comes to swallow up and dominate and all the others, that's imbalanced. Whether it's work or family or sex or money or power or anything out of proportion with everything is terrible. So balance is really vital. But that said, Proverbs hammers away again and again on this idea that if you want to live a good life, if you actually want to not forever be an employee, but be an employer, if you want to have financial security, then you're going to need to work your tail off. And even when you don't want to. And even when it's really irritating. But you're going to have to find a way to push through. It often contrasts a wise, hardworking person with the fool who is a lazy person, who gives up really, everything's just so hard, and they're making up excuses all the time, and all this stuff. I put together a sampling of some verses from Proverbs that address this, and I'll just be kind of paraphrasing, but Proverbs 3 talks about how God disciplines his children that he loves. My son, don't despise the Lord's discipline. The Lord reproves and rebukes and disciplines those whom he loves, et cetera, et cetera. Starting in verse 10, though, we get just a whole, chapter 10, we get a whole string of sayings that are getting at this idea from many angles. A clever son gathers in the summer. The sleeper at harvest is a shameful son. The guy who's taken a snooze when the combines are going is going to bring shame. One of my favorites is repeated in chapter 12 and 28. Oved ad mato yispa lechem. The one who works his own land will be filled with bread. U'meradef rekim chasar lev o isba rish. The one who chases after empty things is an airhead, like lacks sense, or there's two verses that have this idea. One of them ends with lacks sense. The other verse, Proverbs 28:19, ends with, he's going to have his fill of poverty. And I love this idea of work your patch, work your ground. Don't work that other guy's ground. Don't chase off fantasies. What's right in front of you? Make it good. Work at it hard. Another proverb that appears in different variations, the Hebrew phrase is Yad Charutzim, the hand of the diligent. In 12:24, we learned the hand of the diligent will rule. So the boss person is going to be somebody who works really hard. Shock. In Proverbs 10:4, we get the hand of the diligent makes wealthy. So the diligent, active hand. Proverbs 13:4 says the soul of the sluggard craves and craves, but gets nothing. The soul of the diligent is well satisfied. 14:23, hard work leads to profit. Mere blabbing leads to poverty. A lot of people talk a big game, but are you just going to show up and do your work? Proverbs 24, and again, Israel's an ancient agrarian culture. Hey, guess what? If you don't plant, you're not going to harvest. Analog for our time, if you don't save for retirement, you're going to be sad. If you don't invest in your education, your earning potential may always be pretty low. So there's this idea of cause and effect that is woven into the world. Proverbs 21:25, the desire of the sluggard kills him because his hands refuse to work. 22:29, who's ever good at what they do will stand before kings, not obscure people. So if you get really good at anything, it's going to open doors for you in the world. Chapter 26 in particular hits on this theme in so many different ways. Chapter 26:3 talks about how there's whips for the backs of fools. And the fool in the sense of the person who's always trying to find a way out of work is going to end up having to do the most severe work, actually. Mm-hmm. It's like if you just stop fighting the reality of work, your work might be more pleasant. And we're going to talk about that in a bit with the idea of flow state. And there's some fascinating psychology of this. And then there's a sequence of advice for employers on whom and whom not to hire. So 26:6 says, don't hire fools, basically. They're only going to cause you pain. If they're unreliable, they're not going to show up when they say they're going to show up. They're not going to do hard work. You're going to get way more trouble out of somebody who just, you cannot rely on them. 26:8 says, if you give a fool a high position in your organization, that's like a loaded gun. That's like playing Russian roulette. It's going to destroy you. What the Hebrew uses a different metaphor. Let me just check it real quick. 26:8. Yeah, it says like putting a stone into a sling. You're loading the gun here. You're asking for trouble when you put a fool high in your organization. Moreover, you're going to get into liability issues. 26:10 says, like an archer who just shoots at everybody. This guy's a walking lawsuit. Mm-hmm. He's just he's totally culpable for all sorts of stuff, and it comes back on you.
Yes.
26:13. The lazy person always has excuses. There's all sorts of reasons. I can't possibly do that because this is so hard. And 26:14. You're just you're like a hinge turning in place on your door. It's like the video game guy who just lays in bed all day playing video games and won't turn. 26:15. The sluggard puts their hand in the dish and they won't even bring it back to their face. They're just I got my hand in the Doritos. You're just
Yep.
And it's designed to be funny. It's designed to be mocking a little bit. And then to cap it all off, 26:16, the people who exhibit these tendencies, they're convinced that they're the smart ones and everybody else is just a bunch of idiots. And so, Proverbs is basically saying, get over yourself, get up in the morning, put on your boots, show up and do the work. And personally, I love that. That's kind of my, I really deeply believe in that.
Yeah. I wonder, kind of going back to tying this into an earlier part of the conversation, I see some commentary in those verses on upward mobility, but not just for its own sake, right? Like, hey, there's movement, and there are good things that you can experience if you work hard.
Yep.
But it's not work hard to climb the ladder, to get the influence, to make more money, to make more of yourself, to right, like the empty aspirations aspect of it. But there is a sense of like, no, there is upward mobility. If you invest and you save, you will benefit from that.
Yep.
And I appreciate the just both the candor in that perspective, but also the fact that there are genuinely just good ways to benefit from good work.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a positive. But I'm also curious to kind of make a better connection between working hard and that idea that you named of learning with discipline. Mm-hmm. Because I think when we think of discipline right now, we associate it with, like, say, a book like Atomic Habits. It's like all about creating consistency. It's all about honing in your life and honing in you so that you can go after all those big aspirations that ultimately scriptures say will leave us empty if our bedrock is not trust in God.
Right.
And so, like, what are we learning when we work hard? What is the point of our learning when we're working hard? Is I guess what I'm trying to make that connection.
Yeah. So I think we're learning on different levels. Like, like if you're going out and do yard work and you're like working really hard, and like at some point you learn like, geez, I better empty the catcher of my lawnmower now and then, or else it's going to jam up and leave clumps everywhere. Mm-hmm. So you're learning that. And it's just like skills. Yep. Mm-hmm. And this is where there's a big divergence between sort of biblical learning and other sort of Atomic Habits, as you mentioned, which I haven't read. I've heard it's an interesting book, is the motivational structure is different.
Yes.
And the why. And the how do I measure what even success looks like. And so, one of the things that's interesting is the book of Proverbs, and all scholars recognize this, it's part of a larger international wisdom discourse. There's parts of the book of Proverbs that map precisely onto Egyptian wisdom literature, Mesopotamian wisdom literature. And so it's a sort of a wider human quest for order and how to live within order. And yet an interesting analog is that as the book of Proverbs is in touch with these wider cultures, and it's always putting a spin on it, bringing it into the orbit of worship of the true God. But it's not coincidental that there's a lot of bridges between this idea of work ethic today and a lot of secular culture. Yes. Like Sigmund Freud famously said that the real components of a meaningful life, there's only two things. You got to get love right and you got to get work right. And if you get work and love right, you're going to have a meaningful life. There's a famous book out, got it on my shelf. It's Angela Duckworth. It's called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And, she's really bright gal, but she talks about how growing up, she was like, well, I was never like a genius. And everyone always said, well, you're not a genius. You don't have that thing called giftedness or whatever. And she's like, yeah, but what if I just work really hard? And so it's an interesting book. This is a book that also is pretty well known. It's called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. The guy's name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I think I'm saying that right. Csikszentmihalyi. And
awesome.
So this is really interesting because his thesis is there's this thing called flow state. When your mind is, you kind of forget doing certain activities, you kind of forget where you are. You're just like so present. And when you emerge out of flow state, you feel refreshed. You feel like you've just done something really intrinsically worthwhile. And people,
is this like deep work? Like, does this link up with that?
So the deep work guy, Cal Newport, references this a lot.
Okay.
And the idea is you can enter flow state when you're like, if you're a rock climber, like when you're one with the wall, or you're playing your cello. The criterion of flow state is it's got to be something sufficiently challenging. It can't be easy. Otherwise, the brain isn't fully engaged with it. Now, that leads to a very surprising consequence, which is that when people report their levels of satisfaction between their work life and their leisure time, people very often report more satisfaction in their work than in their leisure. If they report, what's my emotional state while I'm working? And they ran this experiment, we're going to text you randomly and you've always got to stop and tell us how you're feeling at that moment or whatever. The aggregate is people actually have higher sense of satisfaction when they're working than in their leisure time on their weekends. Why? Because in their weekends, they're not doing anything hard. They're just chilling. And that actually leads to lower senses of joy.
Interesting. I wonder if this taps into something God knows about being human, being the creator and all. I used to wonder, even as a child, why only one day of rest?
Me too. I think Moses didn't hear right. I'm
That's
Moses, aren't you sure? Didn't God say 2 days of rest?
But I was always relieved, good, Saturday, Sunday. Like everybody has Saturday, Sunday off mostly, but that was my kid brain processing it. And there might just be something to the fact that there are 6 days of work. And that was pre-fall. It's not like this was man, what a consequence of our disobedience. But somehow this is like a greater presence of purposeful work in that relationship between work and rest.
Yeah. And think about the consequence of what this guy's saying about the flow state. When we think about work, part of the idea is I'm delaying gratification. I'm not doing what I want to do. I got to do what I have to do, which is go to work. And I'm delaying gratification. However, if it's really the case that we're most satisfied while we're doing hard things, then it's the other way around. It's that the work is the gratification. And so this is, I think a sort of a secular insight to say, regardless of the outcome of the work itself is subjectively experienced as deeply joyful and meaningful. I think that's interesting. A couple other data points here. I recently listened to Arnold Schwarzenegger's book called Be Useful. And he has a chapter called Work Your Butt Off. And
unsurprising.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, right? And I also recently listened to Elon Musk's book by Walter Isaacson, or it's not his book, it's a biography, whatever. His operating principle through all his companies is maniacal urgency. If you're not here with urgency, you're off. Sorry, don't have a place for you. You need to show up with intensity. Kevin Durant, basketball player, famous for saying, hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. Apparently got that from his high school coach. Thomas Edison famously said, great inventions are just 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. So these are just random little quotes. But the point is, what the Bible is saying about working hard has all sorts of analogs in secular culture. However, there's some real differences, which you were already intuiting. First of all, the Bible talks about working for something that is not yourself. It's working for the kingdom of God. It's working for the good of others. And this is interesting. As I was listening to Arnold's book, I was amazed because the book is called Be Useful. And it's like, be useful for others. And yet, and I actually think Arnold's a cool, interesting guy. But that was so clearly just a moralistic veneer over the real heart of his story. The real heart of Arnold's story and the real heart of Arnold Schwarzenegger's ambition is Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wants to see his name in lights. He wants to see Schwarzenegger written across the world. So the idea of be useful, which he sees, I don't know the guy's heart. Maybe he wants to be useful. All I'm saying is his motivation is Arnold.
The motivational structure is different.
There's that, but then there's also, for Christians, the way that we measure outcomes is different. And for me, this was revolutionary when I was in college, as I was thinking about what is success? How am I going to measure this? And if I was thinking I'm going to go into the ministry, this was before I had a huge falling out with that idea for a decade. But I was like, okay, if I'm going to be pastor, so pretty much I got to be Rick Warren if I'm going to be successful. But what happens if I pastor 12 people in Iowa and I preach on Sunday and I mow the lawn on Monday? I'm a total failure? But then I got to think about it. And from a biblical perspective, If Rick Warren's being obedient and Iowa pastors being obedient, they're being equally obedient, then they're equally successful. So it radically recalibrates how we evaluate our work. So I think both the why and the how we evaluate are distinctive if you're a Christian. And then it also gives you all sorts of tools to think about situations like hybrid work, seasonal work, staying at home work, disconnecting, decoupling work from paycheck. So there's a lot of bridge resources with secular learning, but I think the Bible has the depth dimension to help us understand what work means, what it's working for towards the kingdom of God, and also how not to ultimately instrumentalize it to my own optimization. The cross did not look like self-optimization.
Yeah.
The cross looked like just the opposite.
Yeah, and I think in light of that example, it's appropriate to name the fact that there is good work, and work is good in many ways, but there is also work that is not good and that is incredibly hard or feels deeply futile or is degrading because of the structure of power or the interactions you're having with other human beings. Right. And work causes depression in people. I mean, like people spiral sometimes because of work. And not everyone, you may even have a good, working situation, but you feel like you're not maybe in flow state. Like this guy says, like, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I even remember seasons of life watching my parents go through that, going through it myself, seasons where you're just like, I would rather do anything but this work. And it's not because I'm lazy, but it's like, it's wrecking me.
Yeah. So what you just said there is actually a key distinction, because there is work that's hard, but it's like, dude, just gut it out. I remember one time I was with my mom, with my dad. We were outside like in the late autumn cleaning out our gutters. It was so cold outside.
I was going to say, it was probably frigid.
And my grandma's like, John, let Ryan come in. It's cold out there. And my dad's like, no, he's staying out here till it's done. And, it's just like, suck it up, get her done. But what you said is so very true. And this goes to the Bible. So we talked about how work is introduced before the fall. Work is also distorted because of the fall.
Yep.
God says to Adam, well, because you've done this, now the ground is going to produce thorns and thistles for you. Now, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat all the days of your life. And by the way, dust you are, to dust you will return. And so work does have a dimension of tragic futility. It is where we confront the brokenness in the world and in ourselves, and in the fact that humans have to work with humans, creates all sorts of context for humans to abuse other humans, to make work hell for other humans. There in the Getty. Do you ever go to the Getty Art Museum down in L.A.? Beautiful.
No, but I have heard of it. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. And there's a painting there, very famous. I think it's called like The Toiler. It's of a man just stooped over working in a field. And there's a famous poem about it that I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but it's like the poet says, is this the good thing the Lord God made? The creature to command the world, and he's just reduced to this miserable wretch out in a field. And it's this poetic meditation on just the degradation that this person has experienced. So this is part of the gospel.
Yeah, I was going to say, where then do we go from there, recognizing that that's the case?
This is part of the gospel, is that God promises to heal work, to redeem work, not just in the near term, where work can, become more than a four-letter word. Work can actually become dignifying. God has a vocation for you, not just in the broad sense, the vocation to be a Christian, but the vocation to do X, Y, or Z, because that's how you're talented and wired and whatever. One of the things the Bible talks about is how in the new heavens and the new earth, it seems like humans are still going to be active. That because work is intrinsic to us, there will be projects to do. There will be risks to assume there will be. And the Bible isn't super clear about this. It's a bit of a mind bender for me, but
that maps on. I mean, again, you're being clear that it's not like it lays this out in specificity per se, but that maps on so much better than I think what I always thought growing up, which is like I kind of become this mindless worshiper, sucked into this like ginormous worship service, worshiping unto God, and as if that's a bad thing, but worship is not bad. I'm just saying it becomes this very one-dimensional experience when God's world is so multidimensional, and I don't imagine him remaking and healing the world to make it less, less that. And so whatever that looks like, work being a part of our future, I think makes sense. And good work being a part of our future makes sense. So I'm interested.
And this taps into, multiple things. One, the Bible's clear that work is like worship. It's a form of worthship that pointing to indexing, in Tim Keller's phrase, how our work links up with God's work. There's that. But it also links up with the deep vocation of humans to be a royal priesthood, to do the sort of ordering, justice-based work that reflects God into the world, and the sort of arts, the sort of creative projects that reflect the innate potential goodness of the world back to God. And so there's a deeper vocational identity and logic that undergirds and animates and gives meaning to and drive to the specifics of what that looks like for each of us. And God, one of the things that we see through the whole Bible, and this is very important for understanding the meaning of Jesus, God is a working through humans kind of God. God wants, for whatever reason, that's his business, but he wants to work through humans in this world. And that's why he came as a human. And he's not letting us off the hook. He's saying, nope, I'm going to help you, I'm going to save you, but I'm going to also insist that you get this right. And so our activity, again, decoupling work from paycheck, and paycheck needs to be attached at some point. We need to, whoever doesn't work won't eat, 2 Thessalonians 3. But the point that we're trying to get to is that work is essential to what it means to be human. There is a hardness to it that is part of the brokenness of the world. That is part, if you don't on occasion say, God, this is just tragically miserable, maybe you're not actually alive to what's really going on. That's an appropriate reaction. It's also an appropriate reaction. It happened to me this week. I was, in fact, I think just yesterday, I was sitting down at my desk. I was actually like, a mid-morning nap would be great right now. And then I was like, let me just read the Bible. And then I read Nirdamba Katsir Ben Mevish. We read this one. Snoozing in the harvest is a shameful son. I was like, oh crap, I can't take a snooze right now. That would be shameful. But so there's also a hardness that's like, yep, tough it out. So and discerning between the two is at some level of personal discernment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, it returns to balance, and balancing anything requires discernment.
Yes. I want to say something about that too. Yes. I've heard something wise, I think, from a couple people. Okay, you're going to laugh at me. I think I first heard this from Joanna Gaines of
Love it.
Magnolia.
Love it. Earth in Hand.
Because
Joanna, shout out.
In my free time, that's what I read. No, my sister, okay, super embarrassing, maybe TMI. My sister stocks the bathroom with the Magnolia magazines, okay?
Oh, nice.
So anyways.
Nice.
So,
they're good reads.
So Joanna Gaines was saying, she says, I give up on the idea of balance in my life. I'm not going to try to live balanced in the sense of every day has to have I cannot achieve balance every day because some seasons require intensive effort on something. In order for anything to happen, there has to be imbalance in the moment. But what I'm after in the aggregate is balance. So over the span of a year, over the span of 5 years, I'm insisting on balance then. But chasing balance at every moment is ridiculous. I can't do it, nor do I want to do it. I'm giving up on that. And I thought, that's a good idea, Joanna. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no,
Waco, Texas.
That's incredibly helpful because the question was begged when I said it requires balance. What does balance mean? And I think that that's a wise interpretation of how to incorporate that in your life and recognize, again, it requires discernment, conversations with the scriptures. What do we already know about how life ought to go, or how we ought to press on towards becoming more and more like Jesus, and learning to keep those in conversation and to be willing to adjust, even radically so, in seasons of life where it's not appealing to do so. And I know I've experienced that many times myself, but this is where the book of Proverbs re-grounds us, and that is why where my knowledge ends and God's knowledge continues, I trust the Lord.
Yep.
I may make the wrong choice. So I don't need to have analysis paralysis. I will, in fact, make the wrong choice sometimes, but I trust in God. I trust God to redirect me. I trust God to be my guide. My job is to obey as best I know how and to remain consistently making myself available to him because God speaks. So thank you, Proverbs.
Yeah. Thanks, Bible. You're pretty smart.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Destiny. This was really great. And thank you guys for joining.
Yes.
Deeper Bible Podcast is out of the Bay Church. We're in the Bay Area, California. Would love to see you sometime. We have church every weekend. You could come join us in person or online. Check us out, thebay.church. And until we meet again, I hope you're well. I hope you have balance and good work in your life. And until next time, as the rabbis say, shalomi, homies. Bye-bye.